What if the biggest proof that you still care isn't something you said or did for them, but something you deliberately chose not to show? Your soulmate may have just realized that your silence was never the same thing as indifference. For a long time, they may have watched you become calmer, more distant, and almost impossible to read. And they took that change as a sign that your feelings had finally disappeared. They may have told themselves that you moved on, that the connection no longer mattered to you, and that whatever you once felt had simply faded with time. But something they recently discovered is making that explanation impossible to believe anymore. They are beginning to notice that even when you stop talking about them, you never completely erased them from your heart. Even when you stopped showing emotion, certain things connected to them could still affect you. Even when you stopped reaching out, you may have quietly wished them well from a distance. And that realization is creating a completely different picture of your silence. You didn't necessarily stop caring. You stopped allowing everyone to have access to what you cared about. There is a difference between losing feelings and learning how to keep those feelings private. Perhaps, after everything you experienced, you realized that constantly explaining your emotions was exhausting. Maybe you became tired of proving that your intentions were genuine. Maybe you discovered that not everyone who sees your heart knows how to handle it carefully. So you became quieter, you became more selective. You learned how to carry certain emotions without displaying them. And now your soulmate may be looking back at your past behavior with a completely different understanding. The person they thought had forgotten them may have simply learned how to care without making that care visible. And once they realize that, one question may begin haunting them. If you never stopped caring, then why did you stop showing it to them? And now your soulmate may be starting to notice something they completely overlooked before. The little things you never explained. They may have been searching for some obvious sign that you still cared, expecting a message, a confession, a sudden return, or some emotional reaction that would make your feelings impossible to misunderstand. But instead, they are beginning to recognize something much quieter. They are remembering the small ways you continued to care, even after you stopped making your emotions visible. Maybe you remembered something important about them long after you stopped speaking regularly. Maybe you still noticed when something was wrong with them, even if you never asked directly. Maybe you protected their name when you had every reason to speak about what happened. Maybe you quietly wished for their happiness, even when you knew you couldn't be part of it. These things may have seemed insignificant to everyone else, but now your soulmate may be realizing that they were never insignificant at all. They were signs of a feeling you had simply learned to keep private. For a long time, your soulmate may have confused your lack of expression with a lack of emotion. They saw you becoming more controlled and assumed you had become detached. They saw you stop asking questions and believed you had stopped being curious about their life. They noticed that you weren't chasing anymore and assumed you had finally stopped caring. But now they are beginning to understand that there is a huge difference between not caring and refusing to keep proving that you care. You may have reached a point where you realize that constantly showing someone how much they matter doesn't guarantee that they will value you correctly. So instead of continuing to explain yourself, you became quieter. Instead of trying to convince them of your feelings, you kept those feelings inside. Instead of making your heart visible, you protected it. And perhaps your soulmate is finally seeing that your silence was never empty. It was full of things you simply chose not to say. They may even be replaying old conversations now and noticing details they ignored at the time. They may remember moments when you seemed unusually calm after something that should have hurt you. They may remember how quickly you changed the subject when their name came up, or how you acted as though certain memories didn't affect you. They may remember you saying that you were fine when your eyes or your energy suggested something completely different. At the time, they may have accepted your words because they wanted to believe them. Now they may be wondering whether "I'm fine" actually meant "I don't want to explain this anymore." Imagine an ocean on a completely still day. From the surface, it looks quiet, almost empty. But underneath that calm surface is an entire world moving in ways nobody can see. Your soulmate may finally be realizing that your emotional world was like that. The surface became still, but the depth never disappeared. And perhaps the most surprising discovery for them is that you may have cared without expecting anything in return. You didn't necessarily keep those feelings alive because you were waiting for them to come back. You may have simply accepted that some people remain meaningful even after you stop allowing them access to your everyday life. You can care about someone's well-being without needing to be involved in every part of their world. You can remember someone with tenderness without chasing them. You can hope they are happy without asking them to return. This is the kind of emotional maturity your soulmate may be beginning to recognize in you, and it may be forcing them to question their previous assumptions. They may have believed that if you still cared, you would have reached out. But now they are understanding that caring doesn't always create pursuit. Sometimes caring teaches you when to step back. This realization may be especially powerful because your soulmate may now understand why your energy changed. Perhaps you weren't trying to punish them. Perhaps you weren't trying to make them jealous. Perhaps you weren't attempting to prove that you could live without them. You were simply learning how to exist without constantly exposing the part of yourself that still missed them. There may have been nights when you thought about them but didn't send the message. There may have been moments when you wanted to know how they were doing but decided not to ask. There may have been memories that made you emotional, yet you kept moving forward instead of returning to the past. Your soulmate may now realize that those moments weren't evidence that you had forgotten them. They were evidence that you had learned how to feel something without immediately acting on it. And once they begin seeing those little details, they may start questioning everything they believed about your connection. They may wonder how long you have been carrying those feelings quietly. They may wonder whether you ever truly stopped loving them, or whether you simply stopped giving them a front row seat to your emotional world. They may even feel a strange mixture of relief and regret. Relief, because they are discovering that perhaps the connection wasn't meaningless to you after all, but regret, because they may realize that they misunderstood your silence for far too long. They thought your quietness meant the story was finished. They are now beginning to understand that sometimes a person becomes quiet because the story still means too much to speak about openly. And this is where the situation becomes even more emotional, because discovering that you still care does not automatically make your soulmate feel secure. In fact, it may create an entirely new question inside them. If you still care so deeply, why haven't you returned? Why haven't you reached out? Why do you seem so peaceful without them? Why did you choose silence when your heart may still have been holding something for them? They are beginning to realize that your feelings may still exist, but your boundaries exist too. And that distinction is about to change the way they see you completely. The more your soulmate looks back at the past, the harder it becomes for them to believe that you ever truly stopped caring. They may be replaying old conversations now, but this time they are paying attention to details they completely overlooked before. They remember the way you used to respond, the things you noticed, the questions you asked, and the small ways you showed concern without expecting recognition for it. Then they remember when all of that became quieter. You didn't suddenly become heartless. You simply stopped making your feelings easy for everyone to see. And now your soulmate may finally be understanding the difference. They may realize that there was a time when you wanted them to know exactly what you felt, but after enough confusion or disappointment, you learned to keep those emotions closer to yourself. You may have still thought about them, still remembered important details, and still wondered whether they were okay, but you stopped announcing those feelings. From the outside, that could have looked like moving on. From the inside, it may have been something completely different. It was learning how to care without allowing that care to control your life. This realization can make your soulmate question some of the conclusions they made about you. Maybe they believed your silence meant you were angry with them. Maybe they assumed you had replaced them emotionally. Maybe they thought you were intentionally trying to make them feel forgotten. But now they may be considering another possibility. Perhaps you were simply tired of showing feelings that weren't being understood. There is a point when constantly explaining your heart becomes exhausting. You can tell someone you care, show them you care, and continue proving it. But if they repeatedly misunderstand you, eventually you may decide that your feelings are safer when they remain private. That doesn't mean the feelings disappear. It means the audience changes. Instead of showing everyone what is happening inside you, you begin choosing carefully who gets to see that part of you. Your soulmate may now be realizing that they were looking for dramatic evidence while missing the quiet evidence that was always there. They may remember how you reacted when something important happened in their life. Even after distance developed, perhaps you still cared about their well-being. Maybe you didn't congratulate them publicly, but you were genuinely happy when you heard something good happened. Maybe you didn't ask about their problems anymore, but you still hoped they would find their way through them. Maybe you didn't tell anyone how much certain memories mattered to you, but you never threw those memories away. These aren't necessarily signs that you are waiting for them. They are signs that caring doesn't always disappear simply because communication does. And your soulmate may be realizing that they confused the absence of communication with the absence of emotion. They thought that because you weren't saying it, you weren't feeling it. Now they are beginning to understand that some feelings become stronger in silence because they are no longer being performed for anyone, and this may be where your soulmate starts remembering the version of you they knew before everything changed. They may remember how naturally you used to express affection, how easily you trusted them, and how much effort you were willing to put into maintaining the connection. Then they may compare that person with the person they see now. You may still be warm, still kind, still capable of loving deeply, but there is a new level of emotional control around you. You don't reveal everything anymore. You don't react to everything. You don't explain every feeling. You have learned that having a heart doesn't mean giving everyone unrestricted access to it. And your soulmate may find that realization both beautiful and painful because they may recognize that your emotional maturity was partly shaped by experiences you shared with them. Perhaps they are asking themselves whether they contributed to that change. Did something they said make you more cautious? Did a decision they made teach you not to expect too much? Did a period of silence make you realize that you could survive without constantly seeking their attention? These questions may be difficult because they force them to look beyond the simple story they created. They may have told themselves that you became distant because you changed. No, they may be wondering whether you changed because something happened between you. That difference matters. It means your behavior didn't simply appear out of nowhere. There may have been an emotional journey behind it that they never took the time to understand, and perhaps the biggest shock is that they may now realize you didn't need to stop caring in order to move forward. You could carry feelings and still build a life. You could remember them and still choose yourself. You could wish them well and still refuse to chase them. You could have moments when you miss them and still decide not to reopen an old chapter. This is something your soulmate may have never understood about you. They may have believed there were only two possibilities. Either you still cared and would return, or you had moved on and felt nothing. But real emotions are rarely that simple. A person can care deeply while accepting distance. A person can love someone while recognizing that love alone isn't enough to create a healthy connection. A person can hold beautiful memories without wanting to repeat the circumstances that created them. That realization may be creating a strange emotional conflict inside your soulmate. On one side, they may feel relieved because they now understand that they weren't forgotten as easily as they thought. On the other side, they may feel uneasy because your continued feelings don't necessarily mean they still have access to you. They may be wondering if they still care, why aren't they coming back? And the answer may be the very thing they are beginning to understand, because caring isn't the same as chasing. Your heart can remember someone while your mind chooses peace. Your feelings can remain while your boundaries become stronger. You can still have love for someone and decide that they no longer get to see every part of it. So now your soulmate may be standing in front of a completely different version of the truth. They thought your silence was an ending. They are beginning to see it as a transformation. They thought your distance meant you had forgotten. They are beginning to understand that you simply learned how to carry what you felt privately. And the more they realize this, the more they may begin wondering whether they ever truly understood you at all. Because perhaps the person they thought had moved on was never empty of feeling. You simply became strong enough to stop showing everyone exactly where your heart still lived. And this is where your soulmate may finally understand the part of your behavior that confused them the most. You can still care about someone without giving them access to your heart the way you once did. For a long time, they may have believed that if your feelings were real, you would eventually reach out, explain yourself, or find a reason to return. But now they are beginning to understand that your silence was never necessarily a message saying, "I don't care anymore." It may have been a quiet boundary saying, "I care, but I cannot keep exposing myself in the same way." That realization can completely change how they see your distance. They may have assumed you were trying to punish them, make them jealous, or prove that you could live without them. But perhaps you weren't trying to prove anything at all. You were simply learning how to protect the part of yourself that had become tired of being misunderstood. And now your soulmate may be realizing that the strongest version of your silence wasn't created by the absence of love. It was created by the presence of self-respect. They may be asking themselves a question that has no easy answer. If you still care, why haven't you come back? Why haven't you shown them what you feel? Why haven't you given them another opportunity to see that the connection still matters? The answer may be difficult for them to accept because caring doesn't erase what happened. Feelings can remain while trust changes. Memories can remain while expectations disappear. Love can remain while someone decides that they will no longer chase what once made them question their own worth. Your soulmate may now be realizing that they were looking at your heart as if it had only two possible states, open or closed, loving or indifferent, waiting or moved on. But your emotional reality may be much more complicated. You may still carry warmth for them, while also carrying lessons from everything you experienced. You may still remember the good moments without forgetting the painful ones. And you may still wish them well, without believing that wishing them well means you have to return to the same dynamic. That is why your soulmate's realization may feel both comforting and frightening. Comforting, because they may finally understand that they were not erased from your emotional world as completely as they once believed. Frightening, because they are also beginning to realize that your feelings do not guarantee their place in your future. They may still matter to you, but that doesn't mean they can simply walk back into your life and expect everything to feel exactly as it did before. The version of you who once made your feelings obvious may have learned something important. You learned that love needs to be protected. You learned that emotional access is earned. You learned that constantly showing someone how much they matter can become painful when their actions don't make you feel equally valued. So you stopped making your heart available for public inspection. You became selective. You became quieter. And your soulmate may finally be seeing that your emotional privacy was not rejection. It was growth. Imagine a house that once had every window open. Anyone passing by could see the lights, the warmth, and everything happening inside. Then one day, after too many storms, the person living there closes the curtains. From the outside, the house looks dark. Someone might assume nobody is home. But inside, the lights are still on. The warmth is still there. The difference is that not everyone is allowed to see it anymore. That may be the simplest way to understand what happened to you. Your soulmate saw the curtains close and assumed the house was empty. They never considered that you might still be inside, still feeling, still remembering, but finally choosing who gets to see the light. And now that they are beginning to understand this, they may feel a deep sense of regret over how quickly they interpreted your silence. As the end, they may start remembering all the moments when you could have exposed your feelings but didn't. Maybe you wanted to send a message but decided against it. Maybe you heard something about them and cared enough to wonder whether they were okay, but you never reached out. Maybe someone mentioned their name and you felt something internally, but you didn't allow that reaction to become visible. Maybe you still remembered their important dates, favorite things, old conversations, or little details that most people would have forgotten. These are the kinds of things that may now become meaningful to your soulmate. They may realize that your lack of visible affection didn't necessarily mean the feeling was gone. You simply stopped turning private emotions into public actions, and this can create a very powerful realization inside them. Perhaps you never needed to prove that you cared, because deep down, you already knew what you felt. The person who needs to constantly prove their love may still be looking for validation. But the person who becomes quiet can sometimes be someone who has already accepted their own feelings and no longer needs anyone else to confirm them. You may have reached a point where you didn't need your soulmate to know every thought that crossed your mind. You didn't need them to know when you missed them. You didn't need them to know when a memory brought tears to your eyes. You didn't need everyone around you to understand that part of your heart. You learned how to carry it privately and continue living. That is why your soulmate may now be experiencing a strange kind of emotional awakening. They aren't simply discovering that you still care. They are discovering that they never had the full picture of what was happening inside you. They may have judged your behavior based on what they could see, while you were living through an emotional reality they couldn't see. And suddenly, the past begins to look different. Your quietness looks intentional. Your distance looks protective. Your calmness looks like strength. Your lack of pursuit looks less like indifference, and more like a decision to stop abandoning yourself for the sake of keeping someone else close. But this realization may also force them to confront something uncomfortable. If they want to know what you truly feel now, they cannot rely on the old version of you to reveal everything first. They may have to approach you differently. They may have to become more honest. They may have to stop expecting you to carry the emotional responsibility for both people. Because if there is ever another chapter, it cannot be built around the assumption that you will once again do all the explaining, all the reaching, and all the proving. Your soulmate may now understand that you still care, but they also need to understand that you have changed. And perhaps that is the part they were never prepared for. They may have wanted proof that your feelings survived, but they are discovering something more complicated. Yes, the feelings may still exist, but so does the person you became while learning to live with them. You are not necessarily waiting for someone to return and restore the past. You may be carrying the past while building something stronger within yourself. And your soulmate may finally realize that your heart did not become empty when you stopped showing it. It became private. It became protected. It became something you no longer hand to people simply because they once had access to it. So now they may be standing between two realizations. The first is that you never stopped caring as completely as they believed. The second is that your continued feelings do not mean they can take your presence for granted again. And that second realization may be the one that changes everything. Because if they truly want to reconnect with you, they will eventually have to understand that the goal isn't to bring back the old version of you. The goal would be to build enough trust for the newer version of you to feel safe opening up again. Your silence was never proof that the love disappeared. It may have been proof that you finally learned not to display something precious where it could be misunderstood. And now your soulmate is beginning to realize that what they thought was the end of your feelings may actually have been the beginning of you protecting them. And now your soulmate may finally be arriving at the deepest understanding of all. You never stopped caring about them, but you stopped allowing your feelings to define your entire life. For a long time, they may have believed that your silence was proof that the connection had disappeared from your heart. They saw you becoming stronger, calmer, more private and less reactive, and they assumed you had finally reached a place where nothing about them mattered anymore. But now they are beginning to understand that what changed wasn't necessarily the feeling itself. What changed was the way you carried it. You learned how to hold memories without constantly returning to them. You learned how to care without chasing. You learned how to miss someone without abandoning yourself. And perhaps that is the realization your soulmate never expected to have. They may finally understand that your heart didn't become empty when you stopped showing emotion. It simply became more protected. They may now be thinking about all the moments when they believed you had forgotten them, only to realize that they never truly knew what was happening beneath your calm exterior. They may remember how you stopped asking questions, stopped looking for reassurance, and stopped trying to make them understand what you felt. At the time, they may have interpreted those changes as a sign that you were done. But now, they may be realizing that you were learning something much more important. You were learning that not every feeling needs to be explained, and not every person needs access to your most vulnerable emotions. You could still care deeply and choose silence. You could still remember everything and continue moving forward. You could still wish them happiness without needing to become part of their everyday life. And that is what may be making your soulmate see you differently now. They may be realizing that your strength was never the absence of emotion. Your strength was learning how to feel without allowing those feelings to control you. Perhaps the most surprising part for them is that they may have been waiting for some dramatic proof that you still cared. They may have expected you to return, send a message, become emotional, or somehow reveal that you were still holding on to the connection. Instead, your proof may have been much quieter. You continued living. You continued growing. You continued becoming someone who no longer needed to announce what was happening inside your heart. And from the outside, that looked like complete detachment. But your soulmate may now understand that peace doesn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes, peace means remembering without being destroyed by the memory. Sometimes, healing doesn't mean removing someone from your heart. It means finally becoming strong enough to carry what you felt without letting it prevent you from moving forward. And this realization may create a very different kind of question inside them. They may no longer be asking, do they still care about me? They may be asking, if they still care, would they ever allow me close again? That question is much more difficult because they may understand that your feelings are only one part of the story. Trust matters. Timing matters. Consistency matters. The way someone treats you matters. Your soulmate may finally understand that your heart can still remember them while your boundaries remain firmly in place. You don't have to hate someone to stop giving them access to you. You don't have to erase your feelings to choose yourself. And you don't have to pretend you never cared simply because the connection didn't become what you once hoped it would become. This may be the moment when your soulmate begins looking at your silence with more respect. Instead of seeing it as rejection, they may begin seeing it as self-protection. Instead of thinking you were trying to make them wonder, they may realize you were simply trying to find peace. Instead of believing you stopped caring, they may understand that you stopped performing your feelings for people who weren't always able to recognize them. And that realization can be powerful because it means they are finally seeing the emotional maturity behind the version of you they once misunderstood. If they truly want another chapter with you, this realization also teaches them something important. They cannot simply return expecting the old version of the connection to appear again. They cannot assume that because you still care, everything is automatically forgiven. They cannot mistake remaining feelings for unlimited access. If they ever approach you again, they may need to approach the person you are now, not the person you were before everything changed. That means honesty instead of assumptions, consistency instead of temporary attention, and genuine effort instead of expecting you to do all the emotional work. Because the version of you who once showed everything may now require something different, emotional safety. And maybe this is the most beautiful part of the entire realization. You don't have to deny that you cared. You don't have to rewrite your memories. You don't have to convince yourself that the connection meant nothing just because you chose to walk away from the way it was. You can acknowledge that someone mattered and still choose a different future. You can remember the love without returning to the pain. You can hold tenderness for someone while holding boundaries around your life. Your soulmate may finally be understanding that this is what you have been doing all along. You didn't erase them. You simply stopped letting your feelings for them become something everyone could see and interpret. So if they are realizing now that you never truly stopped caring, let that realization belong to them. You don't have to rush toward it. You don't have to prove that the feelings are still there. You don't have to reopen every old conversation just because someone finally understands what your silence meant. Sometimes the strongest form of love is quiet because it no longer needs validation. And perhaps your soulmate is finally discovering that the person they thought had forgotten them was actually someone who cared enough to let go of the need to be seen caring. You didn't stop feeling. You stopped displaying every feeling. You didn't stop remembering. You simply stopped living inside the memories. You didn't stop wishing them well. You simply stopped believing that wishing them well meant you had to return. And now your soulmate may finally understand the truth they misunderstood for so long. Your heart was never empty of feeling. You simply learned that something as precious as your heart doesn't have to be placed on display for everyone to see. The love may have become quieter. The connection may have become more distant, and the chapter may still be uncertain. But the feeling you once carried was never erased simply because you stopped showing it.